Hey, everybody. Happy Thursday. Happy day drinking, if that's what you're doing today. I hope you have been reading. I hope you've been reading something amazing. If you've been reading this week's book, it's just so beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful. And it's one of those books, I heard it just or read it described as Room, the novel Room meets Schindler's List. And that's exactly what this book feels like. It has that kind of tense fear, worry of room with this global, expansive. Anyway, it's absolutely beautiful. So I hope that you have picked up a copy, and if you haven't, I hope you pick up a copy by the end of our chat with Jennifer. I'm going to read the back cover copy because my mom likes that, and my mom would love this book. So, Mom, if you're listening, you would love this book. So it's called The Yellow Bird Sings. It's a National Jewish Book Award finalist. Rosner's exquisite, heartrending debut novel, I mean, it's almost infuriating that this is her debut novel, is proof that there's always going to be room for another story about World War II. This is an absolutely beautiful and necessary novel full of heartbreak, but also hope about the bond between mother and daughter and the sacrifices made for love. That little review comes to you from the New York Times. In Poland, as World War II rages, a mother hides with her young daughter, a musical prodigy whose slightest sound may cost them their lives. As Nazi soldiers round up the Jews in their town, Rosa and her 5-year-old daughter Shira flee, seeking shelter in a neighbor's barn. Hidden in the hayloft day and night, Shira struggles to stay quiet and still as music pulses through her and the farmyard outside beckons. To soothe her daughter and pass the time, Rosa tells her a story about a girl in an enchanted garden. The girl is forbidden from making a sound, so the yellow bird sings. He sings whatever the girl composes in her head, high-pitched trills of piccolo, low-throated growls of contrabasson. I didn't say that right. Music helps the flowers bloom. In this make-believe world, Rosa can shield Shira from the horrors that surround them, but the day comes when their haven is no longer safe, and Rosa must make an impossible choice, whether to keep Shira by her side or give her the chance to survive apart. Inspired by the true stories of Jewish children hidden during World War II, Jennifer Rosner's debut is a breathtaking novel about the unbreakable bond between a mother and a daughter. Beautiful and riveting, The Yellow Bird Sings is a testament to the triumph of hope, a whispered story, a bird song, and even the darkest times. That doesn't make you want to read it. I feel like you're dead inside. So let's bring in Jennifer. Hello, Jennifer.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I really do appreciate you taking the time. I know that you've been busy promoting this book far and wide, and it is beautiful. I mean, and it's your debut novel. Has it just been madness? Has it just been wild?
It's been a ride. I've been so excited about how it's been doing, and lucky to be able to connect with readers all around, given our life on Facebook and Zoom. So that's been great.
I would imagine that with all the Zoom events that authors are doing, that you must be hearing from readers around the world about this book in particular.
Yeah, I've been able to do, book clubs in New Zealand and in London and, all these kind of fun things that I'm sure I couldn't have flown out to do. So it's been super.
That's amazing. So this is a beautiful book, and the description of Room meets Schindler's List feels really right. Like they really hit the nail on the head. When you heard that description, were you like, yes?
Well, what's funny is a very close friend of mine was an early reader, and she had only read the first half and said, it feels like a version of Room. So I was I had that in mind, and then it was Kate Quinn who said that thing about Schindler's List. And it is true, I guess, that there's this scenario of being in this tightly confined space, and this mother is so creative and is able to kind of bring so much richness to a life. And that's something I really learned from interviewing children who, they're elderly now, but they were hidden during the Holocaust as children with, if they were lucky, with a parent. And I heard several of them talk about these really ingenious things that their parents did. There was one man who he was stuck in like a little school attic, and he would like look through these little slats and see other children playing, and he couldn't go out, and his mom like had an atlas, and she started quizzing him and saying, if you had to get from Warsaw to Odessa, what route would you take, and help, and he would like tell her how, and just these kind of incredible creative strategies for teaching but also for distracting, and
Right.
yeah, really really moving. And actually that man, who is now he was a Nobel Prize winning chemist, and he said to me that his experience of being in that school attic was like being cocooned in love, which I think is such a testament to his mother. I mean, can you imagine having gotten your child through the war stuck in this tiny space, and his
And
feeling
that's his.
cocooned in love. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, this is a book that I did get really teary right there. It is a book that I had to read in kind of sips, because I have a lot of questions that I want to ask about how you write and manage the emotions of this story. But I love the story about how this book kind of came into your life. So can you tell that story about how you met this woman? And
Sure. Yeah. So I'll give you the long version.
yes.
um, I was just finishing a PhD in philosophy, and I was going on the philosophy job market, and this would be like academic work that's pretty detached. I mean, I was working on the nature of self, but it was really kind of far from the self you and I like actually live with every day. Very, very kind of, I don't know, theoretical. And then our first daughter was born, and she was born deaf, which came as a real shock, because I didn't realize, although I later researched and found that we had deaf ancestors going back into the
Wow.
1800s, that no one mentioned. Even when I called and told, my dad that, that Sophia failed the newborn hearing screening test, he said, "Oh, I'm sure it's fluid, or it'll clear up in a few days." And, eventually I get this fax, and it shows our family tree with all these asterisks, and there's the asterisks are the deaf people. It was kind of shocking. But,
Yeah.
in order to process the deafness, which, like I said, I mean, we hadn't expected, and you have these worries about sort of, there'll be maybe this chasm between you and your child. Like you'll have sensory experiences that are different, and you'll understand the world differently, and maybe the communication will be hard. I mean, all these worries.
Right.
And the first time ever, I just started keeping a journal, like just trying to understand my feelings, understand all the decisions, just thinking, sort of watching Sophia. And these journal entries eventually over time became this memoir called called If a Tree Falls. And that I was on like a book tour for that memoir. And I was talking about how my second daughter was also born deaf, and we have recessive genes for deafness that we
Wow.
didn't know. And I was saying that we made a choice with them to go with technology, like with the listening and spoken language pathway. And we were encouraging them to make every sound possible. We were really happy even if they squealed, like when you're in a restaurant and there's that child squealing, we were like, yay, really happy, and all the other people looking. But for them to make sound. And I was describing this, and then a person in the audience, so she described her childhood experience of having to be completely silent, she was with her mother in a shoemaker's attic during World War II for like 2 years. And so just thinking about this woman who had to be silenced as a child, and thinking about her mom who had to kind of tamp her down, just kind of get her to be vanished, from both
Right.
sort of sound and sight and whatever. I just really couldn't stop thinking. And I ended up getting in touch with her and interviewing her. And from her, I met many other hidden children, and then just was immersed in the world of hiding and the hidden children and what that was like during World War II. And, they had all these different stories. They were very kind of idiosyncratic, each one of them really. But they all had these common threads too, of like so much perseverance and ingenuity and creativity and imagination. And, it was really also very inspiring.
I mean, it's so, I mean, you just never know where a story is gonna come from. But the idea that you were literally promoting a memoir about this thing, and in walks your next amazing story idea. You did a lot of research for this book. You did quite a bit of travel. Obviously, you did a lot of interviewing. How long have you been working on this book?
So from the time I met that woman at that book talk to when the book showed up in the, in print, it was 10 years. So it really was a long time. It's been batting around in one form or another. I've been traveling to Poland, interviewing the different people. I was working with a masterclass violinist. I was working with, a forest tracker to learn how my character could move through the woods without leaving a trace. I mean, I did all these kind of crazy things. So yeah, it was really a long haul, but I loved it. And also I felt so lucky to have found writing because, that's, like I said, I was in philosophy where the writing was a bit tortured. You're like very constrained by logic and you can barely make a move.
Right.
And I just love writing. And I found that I would never maybe have ever discovered that if our daughters weren't born deaf, I never would have known that I love
Right.
writing because I wouldn't have been journaling. And yeah.
That's amazing. The research in this book, I mean, it's funny that you took that tracker, the class with the tracker, like that makes utter sense when I hear that, because I mean, I read a lot of historical novels. I'm sure you do too. And there are some that you're like, oh, well, here's a whole chapter on everything the author learned and can't bear to not pass on. And your research, it is all in the very textured details. Like it was just, yeah. I mean, the fact that she's putting the soles of her shoes on backwards. So it looks like,
yeah.
It's amazing. 10 years.
Well,
congratulations.
One thing that, when we found a guide and in Poland, and he was willing to read my manuscript in advance. And then he took me to these settings I should see. So he took me to an area of farmland where there would be barns, a lot like the barn I was kind of describing. And I would see things, and initially, if you think someone's going to hide you on their farm, you figure there's land, right? And there is, but it goes in these narrow swaths back. So all the houses are quite close together and you could see probably into, it was really hard to hide someone because for community reasons, their houses were close, but their land, went way back. And so it was little details and he took me to a convent where there was like a partition where Jewish children had been hidden. And, when you walk in, it's like you walk in, there's like this waft of mushroom soup and you hear how your feet are on the stone. And there's just all these details that, you do imagine them while you're sitting in your own little window seat or dining table at Massachusetts, but going and really seeping in the sensory details was very helpful. And I learned a lot of things and I would have been wrong. Had I not gone and traveled, I was developing this kind of fancy convent and he's like, yeah, we're pretty poor and it's all brick here. I'm like, okay,
well, tear that one down.
well, that's got to get toned down. And, and then, he brought me to this dense kind of primeval forest where partisans had camped. And I got to see just what it might be like to have to dig a burrow in the snow and all these sort of things. It was really an amazing trip. And I also got to go to Tel Aviv and meet a violin maker. And that was very meaningful too, because this man has had this program where he's been rebuilding violins that have been salvaged from Holocaust times. And the thing is on the fingerboard and stuff, when there's pressure from a player over years, it kind of wears down in a very specific way. So that later when he rebuilds and then they're played, it's like you're bringing back these voices, the voices of these lost players. So it was really moving. There were so many details about my research and travel that were very, very moving.
Well, you made a couple of choices in the book that I want to ask you about. One, you made the Shira 5 years old, which, I mean, for story purposes, I mean, there's nothing more rambunctious than a 5-year-old. I mean, maybe a 2-year-old. I don't know. Yeah. So why did you choose 5?
Well, I was interested in an age where she had partial understanding. She didn't really know why they were being moved around. She had some sense, but not entirely. I also made her a musical prodigy. So just in case it wasn't complicated enough, she feels music pulsing through her all the time, and needs to be silent, but she feels this music. And I mean, I thought I wanted it to be a little bit, I was interested in a few things. One, I was interested in when you don't totally understand what's happening and you're being moved around as you know, because of your Judaism in this case, you know, for this particular reason, you know, you're being hunted and you don't know why, or you can't. And the mom is in this weird position where she doesn't want to somehow tarnish the sense of self, but also so the explanation was somewhat, I don't know, elliptical, you know,
Yeah.
in
Yeah,
some way.
not it was never really an answer, but
Yeah,
it's
and yeah, and I also was interested in, I wanted her to be at an age where it wasn't clear she would remember her mom's name or her own name, because I was really, this might be the philosopher in me, but I was really interested in the ways in which we lose the thread of our identity when your name is changed several times. And while there were these, I don't know if you're aware of, like, Irena Sendler was this, she was someone who rescued many children. She would bury
Mhm.
jars in her garden with the paper. It would have on the one hand their given name, their Jewish name, and on the other the assumed Christian name on the other side, and bury them in jars in her garden. And later, after the war, some of those were dug up and people could figure out who they were, where
Oh,
they came from, etc. But it was very dangerous to have your names put together. You know, you really in some ways did not want that. And so most of the time there was just no connection made. And the child wouldn't remember. They're just in this
right.
kind of now, and their name's Josha, and their mom was Mama, like, you know. And so
I was
afterward, how are they supposed to get back together? And that's what people went through. And in fact, I have this, I think that started when I went to the Holocaust Museum in DC, and there was this Remember Me program where all these children, they're asking, like, do you remember me literally? Because if you know my face, or like that I look like my mother or father, like, you could tell me what village I'm from, and then I could find, like, it was like literally trying to figure
yeah,
out
do
who.
you know me? Yeah.
Yeah. And I was so moved by that, and kind of, I wanted her to be at an age where she wouldn't just be like, well, I know who I am, I'm, you know,
Right.
you know, with her name and stuff. So
And
some things should be confused.
the trauma of it helps, you know, I mean, it's utterly believable in all facets, but the fact that she couldn't remember her mom and dad's name, like, I'm trying to remember when I knew what my mom and dad's like, and I wasn't 5. Like, I was older before I knew that, you know, mom and dad were Pete and Gail. Like, you know, that,
Yeah.
I mean, that just felt like such a, you know, it was a choice that paid off for you as an author, as you much like the choice that she was going to be a musician, right? Because she did have this music in her, and it was very hard. And she wanted to sing, and she wanted to. So she has this bird that is it's an imaginary bird that is a coping mechanism. Um, what made you decide on that bird? Like, how did that bird come to be?
Well, first of all, you know, so this girl had her mom, which is more than some hidden children had, and she did have this little shred of a blanket. But
Mhm.
because she was musical, I wanted her to have something that could sort of sing out the music inside her. And I had heard of a child who, in a trauma, had just cupped her hands and kind of wouldn't let go. And I thought, this is a real way someone might cope, a child might cope. And also, my daughters had imaginary friends. And so I just sort of all of it together, it made sense to give her this bird. And also, then by giving her the bird, when you say, you know, I picked a 5-year-old, so you're in this limited point of view because the 5-year-old only understands what she understands. And this bird enabled me to kind of add subtext. So if there was
Mhm.
emotions she didn't even know how to grapple with, the bird could, like, kind of act out certain things, or kind of, you know, if she felt displaced, the bird would jump from its nest to another and, like, say no to, you know, there were there were ways in which it could sort of
Yeah.
accept for her, but also for me. You know, some of the things I wanted expressed, but I couldn't use her to do so. So that helped in the end.
The danger of, I mean, the trick that you pulled off, the magic trick in this, of it is claustrophobic. It's the 2 of them in a hayloft, and there's an imaginary bird, and then a farmer who shows up every once in a while to rape the mom. Um, and that's kind of it. Like, so I like how you built a world from that. I mean, was that a hard part of the process, writing that part of the book, in terms of not getting bogged down in the, like, it's what day it is and what they did every day, but
Well,
also
what's interesting is, I mean, it was my first novel, and I'm a trained philosopher, not a novelist, so so everything
Now,
just
now
takes
I
a
can say
long
that.
time. Yeah, there's that. But I think that because of my children being deaf and us spending so much time noticing our environment in order to help train them to be able to, they may not hear, but they listen. And so
Right,
with technology, they really are astute listeners. And I think given our history of sort of paying so much attention to our environment from a sensory standpoint, that the barn wasn't hard for me, because I was used to that kind of intense, like, what would the hay look like? How would it sound outside? What was the smell? Like, all these things were kind of more natural. In fact, once they started moving, I needed to figure out how to, like, then all of a sudden they were making these bigger steps, and um you almost lose a potency or intensity if you're not careful. And so I had to, like, work on building tension after the barn, so that it sort of
right.
stayed, as compelling. And so it's kind of interesting and a little bit funny when they couldn't move or really talk somehow. But it had, like, this real intensity, and also their relationship was intense,
Right.
you know.
That
Yeah.
is interesting because I mean, once they leave the barn, things are very intense. Like it's very intense. But but because that beginning is really, really, really um I mean, it's really absolutely powerful. Natalie Jenner, if you're still watching, she had a nice
Oh,
thing to say. A year later, I still can't get this beautiful book out of my mind. It's
thank
nice
you.
when so as a writer, one of the things that I was really blown away by um, is that there are huge emotions in this book. Huge, terrifying. Like there's a lot of conflict and danger and huge emotions. So I was wondering, one, how you managed to, particularly at the very beginning of the book, the emotions were so subtly dealt with. Like it was very, like it was, the end line of the chapter, was the thing that would make me catch my breath, right? Like, so how did you manage, the emotions in the book? And then how did you manage your own emotions while writing? Because this could not have been an easy book to write.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, it was a really intense project.
Yeah,
And there were times when I just needed breaks. I think that also has to do with how long it took. I mean, you just needed to kind of step away at times. It was very hard and wrenching. And also because it was based on real, in a lot of reality. I mean, most every choice I made in this novel is based on having heard this having happened. So for instance, the farmer coming to the barn is not just my imagination. It's based on an interview with someone whose mother was visited by a farmer, et cetera. And so each of these things is, like, grounded in real events. And so it was just very hard to process. But also, I mean, I am like I don't know how else to say. I think I'm a really quiet writer, because, like, big action never works for me. Like, I can't write big action. There's never going to be like, and then the gun went off, and then it's just not going to ever happen. I don't know how to do it. I respect it. I just don't know how. And I think that, like, my little moves, maybe in this understated way, actually help convey more somehow. Or I don't know, but I don't know the other way to do it. Like, and
so it wasn't a choice. It's not like you wrote big emotions and then edited things out so that it was. But this
just,
was
yeah,
how it was on the page.
yeah, just sort of small moves.
A
One after.
really great example of this in the book for me, and it's one of those things that you're like, um, I read the section and then I was like, oh, now I want more. I need to know more. Like what happened? But she's the daughter is in a convent. The sisters move them to another convent. The Russians come through. The war is supposed to be over. But because you're in this little girl's point of view and you have no real idea, something traumatic happens to almost all of these nuns, really bad stuff. And you're just dealing with the after effects of this, and the little girl, like, watching them respond to what happened to them. I mean, it was that, ugh,
I know, and that too was historically real. That happened in certain cases. And then I mean, yeah, I think that actually, if being strictly in a child's point of view and needing to take like almost like the simple look, like you can see that this person's shaking and you're not sure why, or you see what they're scrubbing and trying to make these stains go away. In a way, there's more power in that than, you
yeah,
know, than if you were narrating from their point of view, almost, because this
yeah,
is so puzzling and so it's confused, and it's almost like it's not pre-verbal, but it almost is like that. It's like this girl wouldn't have words for that.
right.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
this book is going to sit with me for a long time. Now, without giving away the ending, I'm not going to give any spoilers. I will say that the ending is hopeful and super satisfying for all of you out there. It is hopeful and super satisfying. Was that a hard ending to know when to end?
Um, what's interesting, and I might talk in code now.
Well, I mean,
um,
the
well,
ending is not why you want to read this book. It's a
yeah,
beautiful part of the book. You want to read this book because it's an amazing, beautiful story. The
yeah,
ending is just kind of
yeah.
delicious
Well, what I'll
storytelling.
say about that is I wrote, first of all, the other reason it took you 10 years is I feel like I wrote out like something like there was a time jump in the novel, but I wrote out all that time. Like the mother was in New York, she was married to this guy, she had another daughter, the daughter was, yeah, whatever, she couldn't bond. There were all these things, all of that stuff ended up on the cutting room floor. But so
Oh,
I wrote several
I want
different
to read that.
things.
I
Um,
want to read
for
that.
I wrote several different endings. At one point, the mom dies, and the sister goes to the. I mean, like there was just like all these different choices, but never in any version did I get really past the point this novel ends at. Like it always ended in this like moment of
Right.
hopeful possibility, but not explicit anything. And I think there were real reasons for that, because I did a lot of research on sort of the post possibilities and how complex they are. And so now I really am talking in code, but not wanting to dishonor those by making things too simplistic or kind of just, giving anything that felt Hollywoodish to something that's a really complex reality for people,
Right.
after wars, etc.
So I have to ask, what are you working on now? What can you tell us anything?
Yeah. Um, I was I was realizing that at the beginning of my sort of book events, which was started in March, I had these ideas for what I was going to work on, and I would tell audiences, and now it's all different, but now I do have a roughed out draft, and I'm still working on it, but it's actually it's post World War II, and it's about various there were like so many crazy cases of kidnappings after the war. And I write this is a braided story of three different stories braided together of abductions post-war.
Wow.
And so it's about that. I mean, I wish I could tell you something really like spinny and uplifting, but that's the research I'm in there. Yeah.
Well, I can't wait to read it. Is there a pub date or not yet? You're far
Not
from that.
yet, not yet. I haven't presented it because, as you know, my process takes a long time, and hopefully it won't be 10 years though.
Well,
I
I'll
I
wait
might
for
be
it,
able to
Jennifer.
top that by a lot now, but we'll see. But still, I'm taking my time to like feel very sturdy in the story, and then I'm going to hope to get a contract, but at least I'll feel that I'm very, very clear on what I
Right.
want to do before I get
It's
editorial.
really hard to go from a book that you've been working on for 10 years, and then once you kind of get in the publishing schedule, like it is really tricky. It's really, and second books are a real beast of their own, but it is learning how to consolidate that time and all of that process into a year or a year and a half is tricky.
Yeah, and I mean, I kind of gave myself the goal with it is I just want to be really proud of it. This is what I want to do. I want to produce something I can feel, as proud or more proud of. And that's my goal. So I'm kind of holding tight to that so that I can
Well,
do
that's
that.
a good goal. And you've got to be very, very proud of this beautiful book that you've written. Remember, everybody out there, go grab this book. It's called When the Yellowbird Sings. No, When the
Yeah,
Yellowbird Sings.
the yellowbird sings. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Little
No,
brain
no,
move.
you're good. You're good.
Jennifer, thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us. Again, I really did love this book. And everybody out there, pick it up and get vaccinated if you haven't. Wash your hands, have a drink, read a book,
Oh yeah.
everybody. Oh,
Here's our tea.
oh,
Our beautiful
our
mugs.
beautiful mugs.
Our beautiful
Mine's
mugs.
from Mexico, hers is from Poland,
Yeah.
all around the world.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Great
My
to talk.
pleasure. I'm sorry, real quick. We did get a question. Bev, will it be in the United States or in Europe? Bev, are you asking, is it going to be set in the United States or is it going to be available? Or both?
My new novel.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So my new novel, there's a brother and sister pair who are in Poland who are abducted. There's a boy in Spain a boy who begins in France and is abducted, and there's a girl who starts in Germany. So it's actually it's really in Europe and Eastern Europe.
All right. Well, I can't wait to read it. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Bye, guys.
Thanks.